Under a broken diner sign in a Wyoming snowstorm, a retired Navy SEAL found a wounded German shepherd waiting in the cold. He brought her home for one night and named her Haven, though he had long stopped believing any place could truly be one. But the dog would not rest by the fire. She kept carrying a faded scarf to the door as if someone out in the snow still needed to be found. Her trail led to a locked roadside motel, 3 elderly women sleeping in cars, and rooms that had been called empty by a man with all the keys. Before the storm was over, the forgotten women would turn that same motel into shelter for strangers. Tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please like and subscribe to help our channel reach 1,000 subscribers. By the time Calder Brennan saw the old juniper bell sign, the snow had begun to erase the road. It came slanting across the highway in pale sheets, bright under the pickup's headlights, soft enough to look harmless and thick enough to bury a careless man by morning. Out beyond Red Basin, Wyoming, winter did not arrive like weather. It came like an old law being read aloud over the land. Calder drove with both hands on the wheel, shoulders still, eyes steady beneath the brim of a dark wool cap. He was 47, tall and broad through the chest, built by service, work, and years of carrying things that did not always have weight. His olive-drab combat shirt showed beneath his canvas jacket, the camouflage sleeves faded at the elbows, the dark stripes around the upper arms worn from use rather than style. A pair of work pants, brown boots, and leather gloves completed what had become his uniform after the real uniforms ended. The truck heater rattled like it had lost an argument with the cold. In the passenger footwell lay a folded metal ruler, a roll of electrical tape, and a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in wax paper. In the bed of the truck were jumper cables, a toolbox, 2 cracked fuel cans, and a rebuilt pump motor he had just coaxed back to life for a rancher who paid in cash and silence. Calder preferred both. Red Basin sat 20 miles behind him, its few lamps already swallowed by the storm. Ahead waited his cabin, tucked against a low ridge of red rock and juniper scrub. There would be split wood by the stove, canned beans in the cupboard, coffee strong enough to make a spoon stand up and reconsider its future, and no one asking where he had been. That was how he liked it. Or more honestly, that was how he had learned to survive, liking nothing too much. Home to Calder Brennan had never been a sacred word. It was not warm bread, not a porch light, not a voice calling from another room. Home was a door that locked, a roof that held, a bed placed where no window could frame him too clearly, a closet that never gathered more than he could pack in 10 minutes. He had learned that young, first in houses where people called him son until paperwork, fatigue, or disappointment took the word back. Then in the Navy, where a bunk could become yours for 6 months and still vanish by dawn. Later, in places whose names he did not speak often, where men built shelters out of sandbags, tarps, and jokes because admitting fear gave it too much room. The military had given him structure. It had not given him roots. The Juniper Bell Diner appeared on his right, like a ghost that had forgotten to leave. The building had been closed for years, maybe more than 10. Calder remembered passing it when its windows still held dusty pie advertisements and a neon cup of coffee blinked at truckers heading north. Now the glass was boarded, the roofline bowed under snow, and the sign near the highway hung crooked from one metal arm. The painted bell on it had faded to a dull yellow, cracked through the middle as if the winter had wrung it too hard. The sign swung in the wind. Once, then again. Calder was almost past it when something moved beneath the broken post. He eased off the gas. At first, he thought it was a trash bag blown against the snowbank. Then the shape lifted its head. Calder braked slowly, not hard enough to slide. The truck rolled to the shoulder and stopped with the tires crunching through ice crust. He sat there a moment, engine running, headlights cutting across the diner lot. A German shepherd lay beneath the sign. Female, he guessed from the smaller frame. Yellow and black coat, though the colors were dulled by snow and road grime. Her back was dark as wet coal, her chest a pale gold almost lost beneath frost. One ear stood up, the other bent slightly at the tip, giving her a lopsided, watchful look. She did not bark when his headlights found her. She did not run. That made him more careful. A frightened dog that did not move was not always calm. Sometimes it was simply too tired to spend the last coin of strength. Calder killed the engine. The sudden silence opened around him. Wind dragged snow across the diner lot in low white ribbons. The old sign creaked overhead, slow as a warning from some tired wooden prophet. He stepped out. Cold struck his face and slid under his collar. His boots sank into powder over frozen gravel. He kept his hands visible, body angled slightly away, and stopped 10 feet from the dog. "Evening," he said. The dog watched him. Her amber-brown eyes were not wild. That troubled him more. Wild fear was simple. This was older than fear. This was judgment withheld by a creature that had already seen enough of people to distrust easy mercy. Calder crouched. "Not asking you to like me," he said. "Just trying to figure out whether you're planning to bite my hand off." The wind answered for her. The dog lowered her muzzle to her paws, then lifted it again, as if even that small movement cost something. Calder saw the faint red line near her front leg, not deep, but raw where ice had worried it open. Around her neck was an old brown leather collar. No tag, of course. He exhaled through his nose. That would have been too convenient. His phone had one bar if he held it high enough and promised to become a better man. He turned his shoulder against the wind and called Tamsin Pike. She answered on the 5th ring, voice rough, probably from sleep or a road coffee. "If this is about the goat on Mill Road again, I told them I'm not negotiating with him after dark." "It's Calder." A pause. "That somehow sounds worse." "I found a shepherd by Juniper Bell. Female, cold, minor injury, collar, no tag." "Alive?" Looking insulted by the question. "That's a good sign." He heard paper rustle, then something metal clatter. Tamsin Pike worked animal control for Red Basin and half the county when the budget remembered animals existed. She was 39, blunt as a fence post, and had the rare gift of caring deeply without decorating it. "Can you get her in your truck?" "Maybe." "Don't force it. Storm's moving faster than they said. I'm on the South Loop with 2 dogs in crates and a sheriff's deputy who thinks gentle means yelling in a higher voice. I can't reach you tonight." Calder looked at the dog beneath the sign. The diner windows were black behind her. Snow had gathered along her spine. "What do you want me to do?" "Keep her warm." "Food, water, check the paw if she lets you. Don't crowd her. Bring her to me in the morning, or I'll come by with the scanner if the roads aren't stupid." "They're already stupid." "Then they're ahead of schedule." For a second, the line filled with static. Tamsin's voice came back thinner. "Calder?" "Yeah." "You can leave her if she's aggressive. Nobody's asking you to get hurt." He kept his eyes on the dog. She had not moved from beneath that broken bell. Snow gathered on her whiskers. Still she watched the road, not him, as though the person she wanted might yet arrive through the storm. Calder felt something tighten behind his ribs. Not pity exactly. Pity stood at a safe distance and felt noble. This was more inconvenient. This had teeth. "I'll get her in the truck," he said. Tamsin was quiet for a beat. "All right. And Brennan?" "What?" "Don't name her." He looked at the dog again. "Wasn't planning to." "That's what everybody says before they become ridiculous." The call cut out. Calder slipped the phone into his pocket and went back to the truck. He found the old emergency blanket behind the seat, shook it open, and took the sandwich from the footwell. Turkey, mustard, too much pepper. Not ideal, but kings had started wars over less. He broke off a piece and tossed it halfway between them. The dog sniffed the air. "Don't make me feel judged over mustard," he muttered. She waited, then stretched her neck forward and took the food delicately, as if manners mattered even at the edge of freezing. Calder tossed another piece closer, then another. He did not move until she shifted her weight and tried to rise. Her front paw buckled. Not badly, but enough. The sound she made was not a yelp. It was smaller, swallowed quickly, as though she had learned pain did not always earn help. Calder's jaw set. Easy. He approached one step, then stopped. The dog's ears angled forward, her body lowered. Not surrender. Warning. "All right," he said softly. "Your terms." He laid the blanket down near her, put the last of the sandwich on top, then backed away. For a while, nothing happened except the storm working hard to make the world less visible. Then the dog stood. Slowly. One paw, then another. She moved onto the blanket, took the food, and looked at him again. There was a moment Calder would remember later, though he would not know why at the time. The broken diner sign creaked above them, the faded bell swinging over the snow, and the dog stood beneath it, like some weary guardian from an old roadside myth. Not heroic, not shining, just cold, hungry, wounded, and still unwilling to give her trust cheaply. Calder picked up the edges of the blanket. She tensed, but did not snap. "I know," he said. "I wouldn't trust me either." He lifted her carefully. She was lighter than she should have been. That angered him, not the loud kind of anger that made men foolish. A quiet, useful anger, the kind that tightened bolts, patched roofs, fixed generators, and sometimes carried a half-frozen dog out from under a broken sign, because leaving her there would make the world meaner than it already was. He set her on the passenger seat. She immediately turned her head toward the diner. "No," Calder said, "whatever you're waiting for isn't coming through that door tonight." The dog looked at him. He regretted the words as soon as he said them. He closed the passenger door gently, walked around to the driver's side, and got in. The truck smelled of cold vinyl, grease, and wet dog. The shepherd sat stiffly, paws tucked beneath her, eyes still fixed through the windshield at the dead diner. Calder started the engine. The old truck groaned, then caught. "Temporary arrangement," he told her. "One night, food, heat, Tamsin in the morning. That's the whole treaty." The dog gave no sign she accepted those terms. They drove into the storm. His cabin waited beyond a cattle guard and a narrow track half hidden by drift. It stood low against the ridge, one room deep in places, built of dark timber weathered almost black by sun and snow. A porch sagged slightly on the west end. Junipers leaned around it like old men with secrets. Behind the cabin, red stone rose in layered shelves, bright even in moonless weather when snow found every ledge. Inside, the air smelled of cedar smoke, coffee grounds, cold iron, and solitude. Calder brought the dog in through the mudroom. She paused at the threshold, nose lifting, not afraid, measuring. He understood that. He measured every room, too. He set the blanket near the stove, filled a bowl with water, and found a can of plain chicken he kept for bad weather. The dog drank first, long, careful pulls. Then she ate, not greedily, but with focused restraint, as if some part of her still feared the food might be taken back. Calder removed his gloves and knelt nearby with the first aid tin. "Let me see the paw." She watched him. No speeches, just the paw. To his surprise, she allowed him to touch the injured leg. The cut was shallow, scraped raw by ice or wire. He cleaned it with warm water while she trembled once, then held still. No whining, no theatrics. Calder had known men who made more fuss over a paper cut and then called it combat humor. "You're tougher than most of the people I've worked for," he said. The dog blinked. He wrapped the paw lightly, not too tight, then sat back on his heels. The stove popped. Snow hissed against the window. The cabin seemed smaller with another living thing inside it. That bothered him. He stood to quickly and busied himself at the sink. Rinsed the bowl. Wiped the counter. Checked the latch on the back door. Then the front. Then the back again, because old habits were stubborn dogs of their own. When he turned, the shepherd had left the blanket. She limped to the mudroom, nosed through the heap near the bench, and pulled free the old wool towel he had used to dry her coat. It was dark red once, now faded toward wine and rust, frayed at both ends. She carried it to the front door. Calder watched her lay it on the mat. Then she lowered herself beside it, facing the door. He frowned. "You need to be by the stove." The dog did not move. He picked up the towel and brought it back to the blanket. She watched him with deep, patient disappointment. 5 minutes later, she carried it to the door again. Calder stood in the middle of his cabin, hands on his hips. "No." The dog lay down beside the towel. Outside, wind pressed snow against the porch. The door rattled softly in its frame. Calder listened to that sound and to the slow breathing of the animal on his mat. He should have moved her. He could have. She was injured, tired, no real match for him. Instead, he took an old draft stopper from the closet, shoved it along the base of the door, and placed a second blanket over her back. The dog glanced up once. "You're welcome," he said. Her eyes returned to the door. Calder stood there longer than he meant to. The towel was nothing, a scrap of wool, something he had used without thinking, pulled from a box of old rags. But the dog treated it as if it carried a message, as if cloth could remember hands, as if a doorway could be more than wood and hinges, as if waiting was not foolish when love had once passed through that direction. He looked around his cabin. One chair at the table, one mug by the sink, one coat on the peg. No photographs, no extra boots, no softness that could not be folded away or burned for heat. For years he had told himself that was freedom. Now, with a wounded shepherd lying by his front door, it looked uncomfortably like evidence. "All right," he said quietly. The dog's ear twitched. "You need a name for the night." He should not have done it. Tamsin had warned him. But the word had been sitting in the room since he carried the dog in, warming itself by the stove, waiting for him to be foolish enough to speak it. "Haven," he said. The dog turned her head. Not much, just enough. Calder felt ridiculous. Then, worse, he felt something gentler than ridiculous. "Haven," he repeated. "Don't get sentimental. It's temporary." The dog rested her muzzle on the faded towel. Temporary, Calder had learned, could last a lifetime if a man kept choosing it. He turned off the kitchen light but left the small lamp near the stove burning. The cabin settled into its night sounds, timber creaking, fire breathing low, wind combing snow across the porch boards. Calder did not go to bed. He sat in the single chair near the table, one boot hooked on the rung, arms folded, watching the dog at the door. Every so often, Haven lifted her head as if hearing something beyond the storm. Not a threat, not quite hope. A remembered path, perhaps, a name no one had spoken yet. Calder's eyes drifted to the lock, then to the towel, then to the dog. Outside, Red Basin vanished beneath winter's white hand. Inside, a man who believed home was only a door that locked sat awake beside a creature who believed a door meant someone might still return. And for the first time in longer than he cared to admit, Calder Brennan did not feel alone in the room. He did not yet know whether that was comfort or danger. He only knew he kept the lamp on. Morning came without warmth. It arrived over Red Basin in a thin blue light, spreading across the snowfields and the redstone ridges as if winter had laid a clean sheet over every mistake made the night before. Calder Brennan stood at his kitchen window with a mug of coffee in one hand, watching the wind pull loose powder from the porch rail. Behind him, Haven slept by the front door, not by the stove, not on the thick blanket he had placed near the hearth, by the door. The faded towel lay under her muzzle. Sometime before dawn, Calder had stopped correcting her. A man could fight weather, rust, bad wiring, and government surplus equipment held together by wishful thinking. Fighting an exhausted German shepherd over where she wanted to rest seemed like a misuse of God's limited patience. At 7:30, a county truck came coughing up the track to his cabin. It was small, white once, now mostly road salt and dense, with the words, "Red Basin Animal Control," peeling along the side. The driver's door opened before the engine fully died. Tamsin Pike stepped out wearing a tan county jacket, green cargo pants, black snow boots, and a burnt orange beanie pulled low over wind-tangled blonde hair. She carried a handheld scanner in one hand and a paper cup of coffee in the other, moving with the efficient irritation of someone who had already been awake too long. "You named her, didn't you?" she called before reaching the porch. Calder opened the door. "Good morning to you, too." "That face says guilty." "I don't have a guilty face." "You have 3 faces: closed door, bad engine, and guilty." Tamsin stomped snow off her boots and glanced past him. "Which one is she?" Haven had lifted her head. She did not growl. She did not rise. But the room changed around her attention. Tamsin noticed. Her voice softened without becoming sweet. "Hello, lady." Calder stood back as Tamsin crouched, not too close, scanner resting against her knee. Haven watched the device with quiet suspicion. Her left ear, the one with the bent tip, twitched once. "She ate," Calder said. "Drank. Let me clean the paw." "Miracles do happen." "She judged the sandwich." "What kind?" "Turkey. Mustard." Tamsin looked up at him. She was right. Calder almost smiled, which annoyed him enough to make him take a drink of coffee. Tamsin waited until Haven lowered her head again before sliding the scanner along the dog's shoulder and neck. The little machine beeped near the left side of the collar. "There we go." She read the number into her phone, tapping with one thumb. The cabin held its breath in the ordinary way rooms did when a small fact might become a door. "Registered owner." Tamsin frowned. "Marjorie Finn. Address listed as Sagebrush Mile Motel. Phone disconnected. Secondary number. No longer in service." At the word motel, Haven lifted her head. It was not dramatic. No bark. No sudden leap. But the movement carried such recognition that even Tamsin stopped reading. Calder felt it too. Haven pushed herself to her feet, careful with the wrapped paw. She took one limping step toward the door and looked at Calder. He stared back. "No." Haven waited. Tamsin glanced between them. "That's not a trick." "I know it's not a trick." She knows the address. She knows a lot of things. Dogs know where food falls and which people drop it. Calder. He looked at Tamsin. She was not smiling now. The joke had gone out of her face, leaving the work beneath it. "Sagebrush Mile's been closed since last week." "Closed how?" "Cormac bought it. Posted some kind of safety notice. I heard the north roof was bad." She slid the scanner into her jacket pocket. "I also heard there were long-term folks staying there, but the county file calls them guests. That word does a lot of dirty work when people want it to." Haven took another step toward the door. Calder looked down at the towel she had guarded all night. Then at the dog. Then at the snow beyond the window, bright and blank as if the world had never made a promise. He set his mug in the sink. "Fine," he said. "We check the address." Tamsin's eyebrow lifted. That was almost graceful. "Don't spread rumors." The road to Sagebrush Mile ran east from Calder's cabin, then bent south toward the old highway. Red Basin looked almost beautiful in morning snow. The red earth showed through where wind had scraped the ridges bare, glowing under the white like banked coals. Juniper trees held snow in their crooked arms. Farther off, a line of cottonwoods marked the frozen creek, each branch bright as bone. Haven rode in the passenger seat, wrapped in the blanket, nose angled toward the windshield. She did not whine. She did not pace. Her stillness was worse. It was the stillness of someone holding herself together because falling apart would waste time. Tamsin followed in the county truck. Calder kept his speed low. The roads had been plowed once, badly, and drifted again by dawn. He passed Juniper Bell Diner without stopping. Haven turned her head toward it, but only for a moment. Then she faced forward. Sagebrush Mile Motel appeared at the edge of the highway like a place that had tried to disappear and failed. The sign still stood, a tall rectangle of faded turquoise with 3 missing bulbs and a painted arrow pointing toward the office. Sagebrush Mile, it read, though the S had peeled until the word looked wounded. Beyond it sat a single-story row of rooms shaped around a parking lot, their doors painted once red, now rust-colored in the snowlight. A covered walkway sagged along the front. The north end had yellow tape across it. Several doors bore fresh chains and laminated notices under plastic sleeves. Calder parked near the office. Haven was already standing before he cut the engine. "Easy," he said. She ignored him with the dignity of a queen dismissing a farmhand. Tamsin pulled in behind him. They stepped out into wind that smelled of snow, old asphalt, and something faintly metallic from the motel's dead heating units. Calder walked to the nearest door and read the notice. Unsafe structure. Temporary closure. No trespassing. Personal property subject to inventory and holding. The language was clean. Too clean. Tamsin made a small sound in her throat. "That's a lot of words to say. Get out." Haven limped past the office, not toward the chained rooms, but around the side of the building. Calder followed. The snow there had been disturbed by tires, boots, and wind. Behind the motel, the lot opened into a fenced service area with a dumpster, a propane tank, and 2 vehicles parked crooked near a row of dead sagebrush. One was a blue Buick with a cracked rear window taped in plastic. The other, an old tan station wagon with a roof box tied down by rope. Exhaust puffed weakly from the Buick. Calder stopped. Tamsin's face tightened. Oh, no. The driver's door of the Buick opened an inch, then wider. A woman peered out over the top of a wool scarf. She was small, white-haired, and narrow in the shoulders, wearing a lavender sweater under a gray coat that looked too thin for the morning. Her eyes found Haven first. The change in her face was so sudden it hurt to watch. Haven? The dog made a sound Calder had not heard from her yet. Not a bark, not a whine. A broken, breathless cry that came from somewhere deeper than training. She moved before Calder could stop her, limping, stumbling once, then pushing forward across the snow. The woman struggled out of the car, one hand braced on the doorframe, the other reaching. "Oh, my good girl, my good girl." Haven reached her and pressed her head into the woman's knees. The woman bent over the dog as much as her stiff body allowed. Her hands disappeared into Haven's dark fur. She was trembling, not only from cold. The scarf at her neck was dark red, wine-colored and frayed at the edge. Calder looked at it. The towel at his cabin had been faded red, too. Not the same cloth, but close enough to make the room inside him tilt. Tamsin stepped gently forward. Marjorie Finn? The woman lifted her head. Tears had gathered in the wrinkles beneath her pale blue eyes, but her voice tried to remain polite. "Yes, I'm sorry. I know she should have had her tag. It was on her collar before—" She stopped, swallowing. "Before everything got moved." Another woman opened the station wagon door. She was taller, thin as a fence rail, with steel gray hair cut in a sharp bob and square brown glasses sliding down her nose. Even wrapped in 2 coats, she had the air of someone who knew exactly where every envelope in the county ought to be delivered. "Marjorie," she said, "don't apologize for a crime someone else gift-wrapped in paperwork." The third woman emerged from the rear of the station wagon with a grunt. Short, round, broad-handed, bundled in a mustard-colored sweater and a canvas apron under her coat, as if she had been interrupted halfway through feeding an army. She looked Calder up and down. "You the man who found the dog?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. You look like you can lift things. We may have use for you." Tamsin muttered, "That's Nadine Crowell." The tall one adjusted her glasses. "And I am Eloise Varden," since apparently introductions still matter when one is freezing behind a motel like badly stored produce. Calder looked from one vehicle to the other. Blankets hung inside the windows. A thermos sat on the dashboard. There were prescription bottles in a plastic grocery bag near Marjorie's seat. "How long have you been sleeping out here?" he asked. Eloise's mouth thinned. "2 nights. 36 hours if one values accuracy," Nadine said. "Which I don't, when accuracy makes me sound foolish." Marjorie had not let go of Haven. The dog sat pressed against her shins, eyes half closed, body shaking now that the search had ended. Calder felt the quiet anger from the night before return, but this time it had a direction. "Why are you in the cars?" Eloise drew herself up, as if some invisible counter stood between them, and she was about to sort the mail of human decency into proper bins. "Because Mr. Randall Cormack purchased Sagebrush Mile Motel, declared it unsafe, and changed the locks while Marjorie was in the rehabilitation wing recovering from a fall. Nadine and I were told our rooms were being inventoried. Our belongings were placed in storage. Our presence was reclassified." "Reclassified," Calder repeated. "As guests," Nadine said. "That's a pretty word for people you can throw out without feeling haunted." Tamsin looked toward the row of motel doors. "You lived here?" "For years," Marjorie said softly. "Room 12. Haven slept by the heater vent." Haven's ears moved at the number. "For the record," Eloise added, "I received mail here. Nadine received her medication here. Marjorie's home nurse came here. We paid monthly. Cash, yes, because Mr. Alvarez, the old manager, preferred it that way. But we paid." Calder glanced toward the office windows. "Where's Cormack?" "Town, maybe," Nadine said, "or wherever men go to practice sounding reasonable." A gust of wind lifted snow off the roof and threw it across the lot. Marjorie coughed into her scarf. The sound was small and dry. Calder looked at the Buick's taped window, the cold exhaust, the blankets. "Why didn't you stay at the church?" Nadine's face changed first, the sarcasm slipping just enough to show the bruise underneath. "We go during the day. Soup, coffee, heat. Graham's kind. Kindness has hours when insurance is involved." Eloise added, "The church basement has poor heat and no overnight permit. Also, we were told this would be resolved quickly." "By who?" Eloise looked toward the chained motel doors. "By the man with all the keys." Calder walked toward room 12. Haven rose at once, but Marjorie touched her shoulder. "Easy, sweetheart." The door had a fresh chain through the handle and a laminated notice taped to the wood. The curtain was drawn inside. Snow had drifted against the threshold, but not enough to hide the scratches near the jamb, low to the ground. Calder crouched. The marks were old and new. Claw marks, some shallow, some dug deep enough to strip paint. Haven had tried to get back in. He reached out and touched the scratches with one gloved finger. Behind him, Marjorie spoke so quietly he barely heard. "She must have thought I was still in there." No one answered. Even Nadine, who seemed built to strike silence with a wooden spoon until it behaved, said nothing. Calder stood. The motel looked different now, not abandoned, interrupted. The chained doors were not the doors of empty rooms, but sealed mouths. The parking lot was not vacant, but ashamed. Tamsin took photos with her phone, the chip record, the cars, the notices. The chain on room 12. Eloise watched approvingly, though her teeth were starting to chatter. "Do you have somewhere warm to go right now?" Calder asked. "We have the chapel at 10, Eloise said. "It's 8:40. "Then we have the cars until 10. "No," Calder said. The word came out harder than he intended. All three women looked at him. So did Haven. He was not good at this part. Men like Calder could rig a temporary power line from half-dead parts, read a storm front by smell, patch a split pipe with a bicycle tube, and carry someone twice their weight if the night demanded it. But offering help without making it sound like an order had never been his best field. He tried again. "You can sit in the truck. Heat works. Badly, but it works. Tamsin can call the chapel." "We get you there now, not at 10. Nadine narrowed her eyes. "Are you bossy by nature or by training?" "Both." "Honest answer. I respect that." Eloise adjusted her glasses with a shaking hand. "We cannot abandon the vehicles." "They're not going anywhere in this snow." "That is not the point." Calder looked at her, then understood. The cars were not comfort. They were territory, the last proof that the women had not been entirely erased. He nodded once. "Tamsin stays with the vehicles until someone from the church comes. I'll drive you." Tamsin glanced at him, surprised but smart enough not to comment. Marjorie looked down at Haven. "Will she come?" Calder almost said she was his responsibility for the morning. He stopped himself. "She's yours," he said. The words changed something in Marjorie's face. Not happiness, something more fragile. Recognition. Haven pressed closer to her. They moved slowly. Calder helped Marjorie into the passenger seat of his truck, though she apologized 3 times and thanked him 4. Haven climbed after her with effort, settling half on the floorboard, half against Marjorie's legs. Eloise took the back seat with her bag of prescription bottles clutched like legal evidence. Nadine climbed in last and immediately criticized the amount of dust on the dashboard. "A man can live alone," she said, "but he does not have to leave proof everywhere." Calder shut the door before he accidentally laughed. Tamsin leaned near his window. "I'll call Graham Lyle and Delia Shore if I can reach her." "Who's Delia?" "Marjorie's home nurse. She'll want to know." Marjorie heard the name and closed her eyes briefly, as if guilt had tapped her shoulder. Calder started the engine. As they pulled away from Sagebrush Mile, Haven lifted her head and looked back through the rear window. Marjorie's hand rested on the dog's neck. Eloise sat stiff and silent, jaw set against cold and humiliation. Nadine muttered something about men who bought buildings without knowing how to make soup. The motel shrank behind them, its turquoise sign leaning in the snow, its locked doors catching pale morning light. Calder had driven away from many places in his life without looking back. This time he looked in the mirror until the building vanished behind white wind and distance. He did not yet know what he had entered. He only knew the dog had not been waiting for a place. She had been waiting for a person the world had nearly misplaced. St. Anselm's stone chapel sat on a rise above Red Basin, as if someone had set an old gray ship on the hill and forgotten to launch it. The chapel was built from local stone, rough-faced and pale under snow, with a square bell tower no taller than the cottonwoods behind it. Its stained glass windows were not grand, not cathedral bright, but in the winter morning they caught the weak sun and spilled small patches of red, amber, and blue across the entry floor. Those colors fell over boots, salt stains, donation boxes, folded coats, and a long table where someone had left a pot of coffee strong enough to qualify as a civic warning. Calder Brennan pulled up near the side door and shut off the truck. For a moment, no one moved. Marjorie Finn sat in the passenger seat with Haven pressed against her knees, one hand resting in the dog's thick fur. The reunion had taken something out of both of them. Marjorie's face looked smaller in the morning light, her white hair tucked messily beneath a knit cap, her wine-red scarf wrapped close at her throat. Haven's eyes were half closed, but every few seconds she lifted her head as if to make sure Marjorie had not disappeared again. In the back seat, Eloise Varden held her prescription bag and a folded stack of envelopes against her coat. Nadine Crowell sat beside her with the severe dignity of a woman who had slept in a station wagon and refused to let the universe see her shiver. Calder looked toward the chapel door. "You ready?" "No," Nadine said, "but I have found readiness to be overrated." Eloise adjusted her glasses. "We should not look like refugees." Marjorie turned slightly. "Eloise." "I know what I said." Eloise's mouth tightened. "I also know what people see before they decide what we deserve." Calder had no answer for that. He got out and opened Marjorie's door. Haven tried to climb down first, but Calder held up one hand. "Wait." The dog paused. It surprised him every time she listened. He helped Marjorie down, careful not to hurry her. She leaned on the truck frame, then on his arm. Her hand weighed almost nothing. That, too, angered him. Not because she was frail, but because the world had been asking people like her to apologize for becoming light enough to move. The chapel side door opened before they reached it. A woman in a navy parka stood in the doorway with a medical bag slung across her body. She had broad, steady features, dark hair threaded with gray and pulled back low, and eyes the color of strong tea. She looked first at Marjorie's face, then at her hands, then at Haven's wrapped paw, then at Calder's posture. She did not waste time. "Marjorie Finn," she said, "if you tell me you are fine, I will consider it a personal insult." Marjorie's mouth trembled into something almost like a smile. "Good morning, Delia." Delia Shore stepped aside. "Inside, all of you. Nadine, if you pretend you're warm, I will make you drink electrolyte solution in front of witnesses." Nadine narrowed her eyes. "You always were cruel in a clinical way. It's why people recover." The chapel basement was not pretty, but it was alive. Folding tables lined one wall. A bulletin board held notices about fuel assistance, choir practice, and a handwritten sign that said, "Soup Tuesday is not a suggestion." A coffee urn hissed beside a stack of mismatched mugs. The air smelled of old stone, wool coats, chicken broth, and the faint lemon cleaner churches used when they wanted suffering to look orderly. A man in his 60s emerged from a storage room carrying a box of blankets. He was thin, white-bearded, with gentle eyes behind wire-framed glasses and a black wool coat worn shiny at the elbows. A ring of keys hung from his belt, too large for one building and too small for all the doors he seemed to worry over. "Marjorie," he said softly. "Eloise, Nadine." "Graham," Eloise answered, with the grave formality of a woman greeting both a pastor and a witness. Pastor Graham Lyle set the box down. He looked at Calder, then at Haven. Something passed over his face when he saw the dog pressed against Marjorie's leg. "So she found her way back," he said. "No," Nadine said, lowering herself into a chair. "A cranky man found her under a diner sign and pretended he had no feelings about it." Calder looked at her. Nadine looked back. "What? I'm old, not blind." Delia began her work without ceremony. She checked Marjorie's pulse, asked about dizziness, pain, food, medication, bathroom access, sleep. The questions were plain, but each one peeled away a layer of pride the women had been using as insulation. Eloise answered with dates. Nadine answered with complaints. Marjorie answered with apologies. Delia tolerated the first two and rejected the third. "Stop saying sorry," she told Marjorie, wrapping a blood pressure cuff around her arm. "You did not invent winter, predatory property practices, or male incompetence." Graham coughed into his hand. Calder stood near the wall, unsure where to put himself. The room had too many people, too many needs, too many invisible lines of care crossing through the air. He preferred broken engines because they did not feel embarrassed when a man noticed the damage. Haven solved the question for him by lying down directly beside Marjorie's chair, her wrapped paw extended, her bent ear angled toward the room. Delia saw the bandage. "You did this?" Calder nodded. "Cut wasn't deep." "It's clean." She glanced up. That was almost praise. Don't let it make you proud. "I'll recover." Men often say that before proving otherwise. Nadine snorted into her coffee. Tamsin Pike arrived 20 minutes later with snow in her hair, her orange beanie shoved into one coat pocket, and her phone already in her hand. She brought photos from the motel, the notices, the chains, the cars, Haven's chip scan, the scratches on room 12. Eloise spread her own contribution on the table. Envelopes, not dramatic things. No hidden deed, no confession, no secret key shining in a velvet box. Just ordinary envelopes, folded receipts, delivery slips, prescription labels, and money order stubs. Small papers that smelled faintly of glove compartments, old purses, and the stubbornness of women who had learned not to throw away proof of existing. "I kept what I could," Eloise said. Her voice had changed. In the truck, she had sounded cold and humiliated. Here, with paper under her palms, she sounded like herself. A post office counter had risen around her, invisible but solid. Calder watched her straighten each item with 2 fingers. "This is Marjorie's mail," Eloise said. 3 years to room 12. My prescription notices to room 7. Nadine's propane share invoice. These are receipts from Mr. Alvarez, the former manager. Cash rent, monthly. He signed badly, but consistently. Nadine leaned in. Man wrote like a chicken fell in ink. "He had arthritis," Marjorie said. "He also had bad handwriting." Delia took a photo of each receipt. Tamsin added the chip record. Graham found a legal pad and wrote names at the top as if beginning a prayer in administrative form. Calder remained standing. He did not like how much the table affected him. It was only paper, thin, wrinkled, easy to tear. Yet the longer the receipts lay there, the less those women looked like people stranded by misfortune, and the more they looked like citizens whose lives had been filed in the wrong drawer on purpose. A receipt for February rent, a letter from a pharmacy, a propane slip signed by Nadine because Marjorie's hip had been bad that week. A Christmas card returned to Marjorie at the motel address, the envelope marked with a forwarding note in Eloise's crisp hand. Names, dates, rooms, proof. Calder had seen maps decide who got rescued first. He had seen rosters miscount the living. He had seen men become unconfirmed because the right form did not arrive with the right signature. Paper could save. Paper could bury. And here, on a church table under weak stained glass light, 3 old women were trying to dig themselves out with scraps no one powerful had wanted to read. The side door opened again. Cold air entered first. Then a woman in a gray wool coat came down the steps with a leather satchel tucked beneath one arm and a red elastic band around a thick folder. She was in her 40s, dark-haired, sharp-eyed, and moved with the calm speed of someone who disliked wasting minutes because minutes often cost poor people more than money. "Whitney Ames," she said, not to announce herself, but to let everyone know the useful part had arrived. Graham called. Delia texted. Tamsin sent photos, most of them crooked. "I was standing in a snowdrift," Tamsin said. Then the snowdrift also lacked composition. Whitney set her folder down and looked over the table. She did not gasp. She did not offer false comfort. She picked up the first receipt and narrowed her eyes. "That's good," she said. Nadine blinked. "That looks like something I found in a purse lining." "It is still good." Whitney took out a pencil. Ugly evidence is often more honest than pretty evidence. Eloise straightened slightly, as if complimented in her native language. Whitney worked through the papers, asking questions in clean, precise lines. How long had they lived there? Who collected rent? Did they receive mail? Did anyone tell them in writing they were not residents? Were belongings inventoried? Were medications withheld? Were pets included in any notice? Had they been offered alternate shelter during closure? The room grew quieter with every answer, not because the questions were frightening, because the answers formed a shape. A life could be argued away one detail at a time. A room became lodging. Lodging became occupancy. Occupancy became guest status. Guest status became removal. Removal became abandoned property. A dog became an item. Whitney finally set down her pencil. On paper, she said, Sagebrush Mile is a motel. That helps Cormac. But long-term residence is not decided only by what a sign says. Mail, recurring rent, medication delivery, home nursing visits, propane records, personal belongings, length of stay, those matter. Marjorie folded her hands in her lap. Can we go back to our rooms? Whitney did not answer too fast. Calder respected her for that. Not today, she said. Not safely. Not legally without creating risk for you. But this is enough to challenge his version. It may also be enough to involve Adult Protective Services, housing assistance, and the county attorney if he mishandled property or knowingly left vulnerable residents without shelter. Nadine gave a bitter little laugh. Vulnerable. I hate that word. It is useful, Whitney said. So is a plunger. Doesn't mean I want to be described as one. For the first time that morning, Marjorie laughed. Small, surprised, almost ashamed of itself. Haven lifted her head at the sound. That was the moment Calder noticed Randall Cormac standing at the top of the basement stairs. No one had heard the outer door open. He descended slowly, one gloved hand on the rail, charcoal overcoat clean despite the snow, polished black boots stepping carefully around the salt melt on the floor. His hair was pale blonde, turning silver at the sides, combed neatly back. A gray scarf lay flat against his chest. He looked less like a villain than a man arriving for a bank meeting where everyone else had forgotten to dress properly. His eyes swept the table, then Haven, then Marjorie. Pastor Lyle, he said, voice smooth enough to make apology unnecessary. I was told there was some confusion involving my property. Nadine whispered, not quietly enough. Here comes the boiled turnip in a coat. Graham removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Randall. Calder had seen men like Cormac before. Men who never shouted because shouting left fingerprints. Men who could turn cruelty into procedure and make procedure sound like maturity. Whitney stepped slightly nearer the table. Mr. Cormac, she said. Whitney Ames, I'm assisting the residents. Randall's mouth tightened by one polite degree. Guests. Eloise's pencil stopped moving. Whitney smiled without warmth. That appears to be one of the questions. Randall looked at the papers again. Sagebrush Mile is closed under a safety notice. The north structure has roof compromise. I cannot allow elderly individuals to remain in unsafe rooms simply because they are emotionally attached to them. Emotionally attached? Nadine said. I had 3 good pans in that room. That's not emotion. That's investment. Randall ignored her. Their belongings are being inventoried and secured. No one has been denied property. My medication bag was in room 12, Marjorie said softly. Randall turned to her with a practiced expression of concern. Mrs. Finn, I was informed you were in medical care. I was recovering, and I am glad to see you up and about. She's standing in a church basement because you locked her out, Delia said. Randall finally looked at Delia. Nurse Shore, I understand your concern, but liability is not compassion. If that building harms someone, good intentions will not hold up a roof. Calder felt Haven shift beside Marjorie. The dog stood slowly. Her paw was still tender. The movement cost her, but she made it anyway. She stepped in front of Marjorie's chair and faced Randall Cormack. She did not bark. She did not bare her teeth. She simply stood, yellow and black coat, dull from yesterday's storm, bent ear forward, body thin but squarely placed between the old woman and the man who owned the keys. Randall glanced down. "Is this the animal from the motel?" he asked. Marjorie's hand tightened on the scarf in her lap. Tamsin's expression hardened. "Her name is Haven?" Randall gave a small, dismissive breath. "The unclaimed dog." The room changed, not loudly, no thunder, no overturned chairs, just a tightening. Calder stepped away from the wall. Haven remained still. Marjorie's voice came faint but clear. She was never unclaimed. Randall looked at her then, perhaps for the first time as more than a problem in a coat. Calder stopped beside Haven. He did not touch the dog. He did not need to. He only stood there, his olive drab shirt visible beneath the open canvas jacket, hands relaxed at his sides, eyes on Randall. "You used the wrong word," Calder said. Randall's gaze moved to him. "And you are?" "Calder Brennan." "That does not answer my question." "It does for now." A little silence followed. Nadine looked delighted despite herself. Whitney picked up the chip scan record. "Mr. Cormack, this dog is registered to Marjorie Finn at Sagebrush Mile Motel. There are also veterinary reminders and food delivery receipts tied to that address. If she was removed, abandoned, or reclassified without proper notice while her owner was hospitalized, that may complicate your inventory story." Randall's jaw shifted. Only once, a crack in clean ice. "I did not come here to debate legal theories in a church basement," he said. "No," Whitney replied. "You came here because you thought frightened women would be easier to manage before they became documented." Graham murmured, "Whitney?" She did not look away from Randall. "Pastor, I am being polite." Randall adjusted one black glove finger by finger. "I will have my attorney contact whoever is representing them." "That would be me for the moment." "Then you should advise your clients not to trespass on a condemned property." Eloise's voice cut through the room, thin but sharp as a letter opener. "We did not trespass into our own mail." Randall turned. Eloise stood with effort, one hand on the table, the other holding a stack of envelopes. Her glasses sat low on her nose. Her coat hung crooked. Her face was pale from cold and humiliation, but her voice had the authority of every counter, mailbox, ledger, and route she had ever guarded. "You may call us guests," she said. "You may call Haven unclaimed. You may call our rooms unsafe, temporary, discontinued, inventoried, or whatever word keeps your conscience folded neatly. But our names were there, on letters, on medicine, on rent receipts, on delivery logs. Names do not become weather because a man with keys finds them inconvenient." No one moved. Even Randall seemed briefly unable to locate the correct sentence. Then Haven leaned back, just enough for her shoulder to touch Marjorie's knee. The gesture was small. It undid Marjorie. She covered her mouth with one hand, not to hide tears, but to hold herself together in front of a man who had already taken too much. Calder felt something settle in him then. Not rage. Rage was easy and often useless. This was more deliberate, a decision without drama. He would not let the day end with these women reduced to a misunderstanding. Randall looked around the room and realized, perhaps, that it had filled with witnesses while he was speaking. Tamsin with her photos, Delia with medical notes, Whitney with a pencil, Graham with the keys, Calder with silence, Haven with loyalty. 3 old women with paper. He gave a curt nod. "I expect all parties to stay off the property until this matter is reviewed." "Then review fast," Nadine said. "Some of us are old, and I refuse to haunt a man who bores me." Randall left without answering. The outer door closed above them. For several seconds, The room remained still. Then Delia exhaled. "Well?" Nadine sank back into her chair. "I need soup or a misdemeanor." Graham, pale but trying, said, "We can provide soup." "That'll do for now." The tension broke, not into laughter exactly, but into movement. Delia returned to her medical bag. Tamsin saved the photos to a cloud folder because, as she put it, county phones had the survival instincts of moths. Whitney began dividing the documents into piles: residency, medical, property, animal ownership, immediate risk. Calder crouched beside Haven. The dog's legs trembled from standing too long. He saw it now, saw the cost beneath the courage. He slipped one hand under her chest, steadying without forcing her down. "Enough," he said softly. "You made your point." Haven looked at Marjorie first. Only then did she sit. Marjorie reached for Calder's sleeve. Her fingers barely caught the canvas. "Thank you," she said. He did not know what to do with gratitude, so he looked at the table instead. At the receipts nobody had wanted, at the envelopes that had survived glove boxes, purse linings, and a night in a freezing car. At the papers that had not saved anyone yet, but had begun to argue. "Don't thank me," he said. "Keep everything." Eloise, already gathering a neat stack, said, "Mr. Brennan, that is the first sensible thing you have said all morning." Nadine looked up from her coffee. "Second." He admitted he was bossy. For reasons he could not explain, Calder almost smiled again. Sunlight shifted through the stained glass and laid a small red square across the table, right over Marjorie's rent receipt from February. The paper glowed as if it had been blessed by some modest, practical saint of carbon copies and stubborn women. Calder had come to the chapel with a dog and a problem. He left that morning with something heavier, a list of names, a folder of proof, and the uneasy understanding that justice did not always begin with a weapon, a badge, or a shouted truth. Sometimes it began with someone old enough to be ignored, refusing to throw away a receipt. Calder Brennan had designed his cabin for one man and no explanations. It was not ugly. In winter light, with snow lifting off the red ridges and juniper shadows lying blue across the porch, the place even had a rough, accidental dignity. The logs were dark from weather. The chimney drew well. The roof held. The pantry shelves were labeled in black marker. Every tool had a place, every coat hook had a purpose, and no chair sat where no one was expected to sit. By late afternoon, Marjorie Finn had changed that without moving anything important. She folded a dish towel into a neat square and placed it beside the sink. Calder stared at it as if she had altered the foundation. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know." She adjusted the towel so its edges lined up. "That is why I am doing it gently." He did not know what that meant, so he checked the stove. Again. Haven lay on a blanket near Marjorie's chair, her injured paw stretched out, her amber-brown eyes following the old woman with quiet devotion. The dog had slept hard after the chapel, exhausted by the morning's cold, the reunion, and the long stand in front of Randall Cormack. Now she lifted her head each time Marjorie moved, as though afraid the room might make the old woman disappear if no one kept watch. Outside, Red Basin shone under a high, pale sky. The storm had passed for the moment, leaving the world too bright. Snow rested on the sagebrush in soft white caps. The red stone beyond the cabin looked like embers banked beneath ash. It was the kind of winter beauty that made men forget frostbite, had excellent manners until it took your fingers. Calder had offered his cabin because the chapel basement could not keep Marjorie overnight. Pastor Graham had said it with apology in his eyes and a ring of keys trembling in one hand. No overnight permit, weak furnace, insurance language, sharp enough to cut charity into pieces. Delia Shore had been more direct. "She needs warmth, Rest and someone who can carry firewood without turning it into a sermon, Delia had said, looking straight at Calder. Nadine had volunteered the station wagon until Delia threatened her with a medical lecture. Eloise had refused to leave her papers unattended until Whitney promised to lock them in Graham's office. So Marjorie came to the cabin. Not permanently. That was the word Calder kept setting down inside his mind like a sandbag. Temporarily. One night, maybe two. A practical arrangement. Warmth, food, safety, until the church and Whitney found something better. Yet temporary things had a way of unpacking themselves if a man looked away too long. Marjorie's cane leaned beside the table. Her scarf hung from the peg near the door, the wine-red wool frayed at one end. Her small brown bag sat on the bench beneath the window. Her teacup, because she preferred tea to Calder's motor oil pretending to be coffee, rested near the stove. The cabin had not grown larger. It had grown occupied. Calder stood by the counter, hands braced on the edge, trying to remember whether he had ever hosted anyone who was not there to fix a wire, deliver fuel, or ask him to help pull a truck out of a ditch. Marjorie watched him over the rim of her cup. Mr. Brennan. Calder? That is what I said in spirit. He looked at her. A very small smile touched her mouth. Haven's tail gave one faint thump, as if approving the joke. Marjorie was wrapped in one of Calder's spare wool blankets, her white hair combed back with fingers, her face pale but steadier after soup and warmth. She had a librarian's posture even in exhaustion, as though somewhere in the universe a shelf might go crooked if she slumped too much. "Do you eat supper?" she asked. "Yes." "On purpose?" He glanced at the pantry. "Usually." "That is less reassuring than you think." "I have beans?" "I suspected as much. There's also canned chili." "Good heavens. It has protein." "So does shoe leather, but civilization asks us to aim higher." Calder looked toward Haven. "You hear this? I save her dog, and she insults my pantry." Marjorie's eyes softened at the word dog. "You saved my family." The sentence landed too quietly to defend against. Calder turned back to the stove. "Haven saved herself. I mostly drove." "No." Marjorie folded her hands around the cup. She waited. "There is a difference." He did not answer, because he understood waiting more than he wanted to. Delia arrived before dusk with a medical bag, a grocery sack, and the expression of a woman who trusted no man alone with nutrition. She brought wound wash for Haven, Marjorie's medication list, a container of soup from Nadine, bread wrapped in foil, and 3 apples she placed on Calder's counter as if restoring order to a fallen kingdom. "You own vegetables?" she asked. "I've seen them." "In the wild?" "Mostly cans." Delia gave him a look that would have made a lesser man confess crimes. She checked Marjorie first. Blood pressure, temperature, hydration, pain. She did it all with quiet speed, not fussing, not clucking, not turning care into performance. Then she knelt by Haven and unwrapped the dog's paw. Haven tolerated her with solemn suspicion. "She likes you," Marjorie said. Delia glanced at the dog's stiff face. "That is a generous interpretation. She lets you touch her." Low standards are still standards. Calder leaned against the wall near the door, arms folded, watching Delia clean the scrape. Haven's paw looked better than the night before, though the skin was still raw where ice or wire had cut it. Delia's hands were gentle but exact. She did not coo. She did not make the dog into a symbol. She treated hurt as something deserving attention, whether or not it had a grand story attached. Calder respected that. Delia wrapped the paw again and looked up at him. "You did a decent job." Almost praised twice in one day. "Do not become dependent." Marjorie smiled into her tea. For a while, the cabin held a fragile kind of domestic peace. Delia wrote notes on a small pad. Marjorie asked if Calder had another saucepan. Calder lied and said he had two, then discovered one under the sink behind a coil of hose. Haven slept with her head on Marjorie's boot. Snow ticked softly against the windows as the wind shifted. Then Delia saw the locks. Not because they were unusual, because there were too many. The front door had the original deadbolt, a second bar latch, and a small wedge Calder kept tucked beneath the frame. The back door had a chain, a bolt, and a habit polished into the wood around the handle from being checked again and again. Delia watched him test the front lock after bringing in more firewood. Once, twice. Then, after placing the logs by the stove, a third time. She did not speak until Marjorie had gone to the small bedroom to rest. Haven followed Marjorie to the doorway, then settled just outside it like a quiet sentry. Delia packed her medical bag slowly. "You always count exits?" Calder kept his eyes on the stove. "Only the ones that matter." "That sounds like an answer you have used before." "It works?" "Does it?" He looked at her then. Delia did not flinch. Her face was calm, but not soft. She had the kind of steadiness that did not ask permission to see what was in front of it. Calder said, "I'm not the patient." "No, you are the man turning a cabin into a locked box while pretending it is a house." The words should have made him angry. Instead, they found a place already sore. He picked up the poker and moved a log that did not need moving. Sparks lifted, bright as brief insects. "I like things secure." "Everyone does." "Then we agree." Delia zipped her bag. "Some people lock doors to keep the cold out. Some lock them because they are afraid warmth will come in and need something from them." Calder looked at the fire. The cabin seemed to listen. Delia's voice softened, but only slightly. "I am not asking you to tell me anything, Calder. I am asking you not to confuse being needed with being trapped." He gave a short laugh without humor. "That on a pamphlet somewhere?" "It should be. People might read it while avoiding therapy." Despite himself, the corner of his mouth moved. Delia saw it and allowed him the dignity of pretending she had not. At the door, she paused. "Randall sent notices to the chapel. Whitney has copies. He is warning that anyone entering Sagebrush Mile will be treated as trespassing." "Of course he is." "He is also telling people you are unstable." Calder's expression did not change. Delia watched him more closely. A hot-headed veteran, a stranger, making trouble over a dog and sentimental old women. That kind of language. Now the anger came. Not fast, not loud. It moved through him like cold water under ice. "He said that?" "Not directly to me, to someone at the fuel office, which means he wanted it repeated." Calder set the poker down carefully. Randall knew what kind of story frightened towns. Not facts, not lawsuits. A simpler tale. A damaged military man. A few confused old women. An emotional dog. An unfortunate misunderstanding made dangerous by masculinity and snow. A smart lie did not need to win. It only needed to make decent people hesitate. Delia opened the door and pulled up her hood. "Do not give him the version of you he is describing." Calder looked at her. "That was not advice," she said. "It was a medical warning." After she left, the cabin settled into evening. Marjorie slept for nearly an hour. Calder reheated Nadine's soup and discovered, with some irritation, that it was excellent. It had beans, ham, carrots, onion, and something peppery enough to make winter reconsider its authority. He ate one bowl standing up, then a second at the table, hoping no one had noticed. Marjorie noticed. "Nadine will be unbearable if I tell her." "Then don't." "I am elderly, Mr. Brennan, not merciful." "Haven," he said, pointing with his spoon, "your person is difficult?" Haven blinked from her place near Marjorie's chair. Marjorie folded a napkin. She knows. Supper changed the room, not dramatically. No walls fell, no old wounds confessed themselves by candlelight. But the table had 2 bowls on it, then 3, because Marjorie insisted Haven deserved a little broth, cooled in a saucer. Calder almost objected, then remembered he had named the dog Haven, and therefore had lost the right to pretend he was strict. Afterward, Marjorie rose carefully and began collecting bowls. Calder took them from her. "I've got it. I can help. You can sit. I have been told that all day. It has not improved with repetition. Then stand near the stove and supervise." "That I can do." She stood near the stove and supervised incorrectly, telling him where to place the mugs, which rag to use, and why a clean counter was not a philosophical concept, but a duty owed to tomorrow morning. He let her talk. That surprised him most. He had spent years shaping silence into furniture around himself. Now an old woman stood in his kitchen explaining that spoons should face the same direction in a drawer, and he did not feel invaded. Not exactly. More like someone had opened a window in a room he had forgotten was stale. Night came early. Snow began again, softer than before. Calder made up the bed in the small room for Marjorie and placed an extra quilt at the foot. She touched the quilt's edge. "This is too much." "It's a blanket." "It is still too much when one is used to making do." He looked at her then. Maybe making do is overrated. Marjorie's eyes lowered. Her hand moved to the wine-red scarf at her neck. Haven stood. She crossed the room, slow on the bandaged paw, and tugged gently at the end of Marjorie's scarf. "Haven," Marjorie whispered. The dog pulled once more, not hard enough to take it, only enough to ask. Marjorie sat on the edge of the bed and unwound the scarf. Her fingers lingered in the wool. "I wore this the day I brought her home," she said. She was smaller then. All ears and suspicion. Someone had left her at the shelter with a bag of food and no note. I told myself I was too old for a young dog. Haven took the scarf carefully in her mouth. Marjorie smiled sadly. She disagreed. The dog carried the scarf out of the bedroom. Calder followed her with his eyes. Haven went to the front door, laid the scarf on the mat, and lowered herself beside it. The same place as the towel, the same watch. But this time Calder understood more than he had the night before. Marjorie was not in that room at Sagebrush Mile. Haven had learned that. Still, she placed the scarf at a door. Not because she expected the old motel to open from inside Calder's cabin. Not because dogs believed in miracles more than people. Because a door was where waiting belonged. Because love, when it had been interrupted, kept returning to thresholds. Marjorie appeared in the bedroom doorway, one hand on the frame. "I'm sorry," she said. She does this when she is worried. Calder looked at the scarf, at Haven's tired head resting near it, at his own door with its bolts and latches and wedge. For a moment he saw the cabin the way someone else might, a place built not to welcome, but to withstand, a strong little fort on a snowy ridge, useful, safe, empty. He walked to the front door. Haven lifted her eyes. Calder did not move the scarf. Instead, he checked the latch once, then stopped before the second check. His hand hovered near the bolt, fingers remembering the old habit. He lowered his hand. The room became very quiet. It was a small thing. So small no one outside that cabin would have understood it as courage. Marjorie understood. Delia would have, too. Calder stepped back and dragged the old chair from the table to the stove, angling it so Marjorie could see the fire from the bedroom if she left the door open. "There," he said. "If she's going to guard the door, she might as well have a decent view." Marjorie's eyes shone. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. She's stubborn." She learned from women. "That explains a lot." Marjorie laughed softly, and the sound settled into the cabin beams like warmth. Later, after Marjorie slept and Haven's breathing evened out beside the scarf, Calder sat awake at the table. Randall's rumor moved through his mind like a draft under a door. Hot-headed veteran, stranger, trouble. He knew how easily a man could become the shape other people feared. He also knew how easy it would be to leave. He could drive Marjorie back to the chapel in the morning, hand Haven over to Tamsin for formal processing, tell Whitney he was available if they needed a statement, and return to his orderly life of locked doors and unlabeled grief. No one could accuse him of cruelty. No one could say he had done nothing. But Haven shifted in her sleep, one paw touching the wine-red scarf. Calder looked at the scarf for a long time. Then he rose, took a scrap of paper from the drawer, and wrote 3 things before he could talk himself out of them. Room 12 lock, medication bag, property inventory. He placed the note beside his keys. Not a promise, not yet. Just 3 items that needed fixing. For Calder Brennan, that had always been the safest form of care. Outside, snow covered his porch steps again, soft and bright under the lamp he had left burning. Inside, the cabin held 1 old woman, 1 wounded dog, and 1 man still trying to decide whether a place became a home when someone entered it or when someone chose not to leave. By noon, the sky over Red Basin had gone white in every direction. Not gray, not dark. White. It pressed down over the highway, over the red ridges, over the junipers and fences and the long, empty fields, until the world looked as if God had taken an eraser to Wyoming and changed his mind halfway through. Snow moved sideways across the glass of Calder Brennan's cabin, fine at first, then thick, then violent enough to make the porch lamp blur in daylight. Calder had been under the sink tightening a pipe that did not need tightening when Delia called. "Highway's closed near the sagebrush turnoff," she said without greeting. 3 vehicles stuck, maybe more behind them. The chapel's full, and the power is blinking like it's trying to confess something. Calder straightened too fast and hit the back of his shoulder on the cabinet. He did not swear. Marjorie was at the table. Nadine would have been disappointed in his restraint. "How many people?" he asked. "Hard to say. Deputy Moss is trying to get eyes on it. Town rescue is tied up south of Red Basin with a jackknifed cattle hauler. Graham's got 12 people at the chapel already, and the furnace is losing the argument." Calder looked toward the front door. Haven was there with Marjorie's wine-red scarf between her paws, not asleep, not quite awake. Marjorie sat near the stove in Calder's old chair, one hand folded around a cup of tea. She had been pretending not to listen from the first ring. Delia continued, "We need space, heat, a kitchen, shelter close to the highway." "No." "I haven't said it." "You were about to." Sagebrush Mile. Calder closed his eyes for 1 second. Outside, wind struck the cabin hard enough to rattle the stovepipe. Haven lifted her head. "The North Row's bad," Calder said. "Orrin Vale is already on his way to check what can be used. Whitney is calling Randall. Graham is calling everyone with blankets. Moss is trying not to sound panicked, which means he is very panicked." Calder looked at Marjorie. She did not speak. She did not need to. The scarf under Haven's paw seemed suddenly less like memory and more like a flag. "I'm coming," Calder said. Marjorie stood before. He hung up. "No," he said. She looked at him with the patient disappointment of a woman who had survived more than men telling her no. "Calder, the roads are bad." "I noticed. They are visible from the window." "You're still recovering." "I am old, not ornamental." Haven rose beside her, testing the wrapped paw. Calder pointed at the dog. "You too." Haven stared at him. Marjorie reached for her cane. "If that motel opens tonight, I will not sit here like a misplaced teacup while strangers sleep in the rooms we were pushed out of." He had no good answer. That was becoming a pattern with Marjorie Finn. Calder drove slowly, with Marjorie beside him, and Haven braced on the floorboard between her boots. The road toward town was a pale tunnel cut through moving snow. His wipers fought like tired metronomes. Every fence post appeared late. Every ditch disguised itself with a generous white smile. At street. Anselm, the chapel yard was crowded with vehicles, hazard lights blinking behind curtains of snow. Graham Lyle stood under the side awning in his black wool coat, white beard dusted with flakes, directing two men carrying crates of canned goods. He had the look of a shepherd whose flock had multiplied without consulting him. Delia emerged from the basement door with her medical bag across one shoulder and a clipboard tucked under her arm. "Good," she said when she saw Calder. "You brought the general." Marjorie looked puzzled. Delia nodded toward her. "Nadine says you outrank everyone by moral seniority." From inside the chapel came Nadine's voice. "And because she doesn't burn soup." Eloise Varden appeared behind Graham, bundled in her gray coat, glasses fogged, a pencil already behind one ear. She carried a notebook as if it were a shield approved by heaven. "Current count," she said. 12 here, 8 reported stranded near the highway curve, 2 possibly in a pickup past the old culvert, 1 man with oxygen, 1 woman diabetic, 1 truck driver refusing to admit he is shaking. "Where's Moss?" Calder asked, trying to reach Randall without committing a sin into the radio. Deputy Harlan Moss stood near his cruiser, broad hat pulled low, silver mustache iced white at the edges. He was nearly 60, thick around the middle, with the patient misery of a local lawman who had spent 30 years explaining weather to people who thought speed limits were suggestions. He nodded when Calder approached. "Brennan?" "Deputy?" "I got folks out there needing walls. I got a chapel full. I got a motel sitting empty because a man with polished boots thinks liability freezes slower than people." "Randall coming?" "He says he is." "That mean yes?" "That means he wants witnesses to know he was inconvenienced." A pickup with county plates crawled into the chapel lot then, followed by a dark SUV too clean for the weather. The pickup door opened first, and Orrin Vale unfolded himself from the driver's seat, like a long measuring tool in a human coat. He was 58, all angles, with a gray mustache, red ears, and a yellow-brown construction jacket zipped to his chin. A small level poked from one pocket. The SUV door opened more carefully. Randall Cormack stepped out in his charcoal overcoat, scarf tucked flat, black gloves immaculate. Snow landed on his shoulders and seemed embarrassed to stay. Whitney Ames got out of the passenger side before he could speak. Her dark hair was tucked under a wool cap, and she held her red-banded folder inside her coat like a document with a pulse. "Mr. Cormack has agreed to meet us at the property," she said. Randall's mouth tightened. "I agreed to assess an emergency request, not surrender control of my building to an armed mob of sentiment." Nadine, from the chapel steps, called, "No one invited sentiment. We invited soup." Randall ignored her, which proved he had never truly fought a kitchen woman. The convoy moved toward Sagebrush Mile, with Moss leading, Calder behind him, Orrin's county truck next, then Randall's SUV, Graham's van loaded with blankets, and Delia riding with Eloise so the passenger seat could become, in Eloise's words, a mobile command surface. The motel appeared out of the storm in pieces, the turquoise sign first, then the office roof, then the row of red doors blurred by snow. In daylight, it had looked abandoned. In the storm, it looked accused. Orrin did not waste time. He trudged through the parking lot, rapped his knuckles against posts, inspected sagging gutters, checked the north walkway, then disappeared into the office after Randall unlocked it with theatrical reluctance. Calder followed with a flashlight. The office smelled of cold carpet, dust, and old coffee. Randall stood near the desk, watching everyone as if measuring what their presence might cost him. Orrin swept the flashlight across the ceiling, then the wall where water stains ran like brown maps. "North Row is bad," Orrin said. "No argument there." Roof load's wrong. Keep people out. Randall lifted his chin slightly. Orrin turned his light toward the lobby, the interior hall to the south rooms, the kitchen door. Office is ugly, not deadly. Lobby usable. South row needs spot checks. Kitchen needs gas test, vent check, and someone who knows which wires not to trust. Everyone looked at Calder. He sighed. I hate being nominated by silence. You love wires, Delia said. I tolerate wires. Wires are at least honest when they fail. Orrin pointed toward the kitchen. Gas stays off until he clears it. Heat goes room by room. No north wing, no second floor storage. No one in the laundry until I check the floor. Randall said, This building is under closure notice. Moss brushed snow from his mustache. And people are under weather. Whitney opened her folder. You can refuse to open usable areas during an emergency, Mr. Cormack. That is your legal right, perhaps. But every witness here will remember you exercised it while people were stranded within sight of the property. Randall looked at the windows, where the snow erased the highway in bright, merciless waves. For once, his clean language had nowhere comfortable to stand. He removed the ring of keys from his coat pocket and placed it on the counter. This is temporary, he said, strictly emergency access. Nadine stepped past him, took the keys, and sorted through them with alarming confidence. All mercy is temporary until somebody decides to keep doing it. The motel opened not with a shout, but with tasks. That was what Calder noticed. Not triumph. Not applause. Work. Graham and 2 volunteers unloaded blankets, paper cups, bottled water, canned food, batteries, and folding chairs. Delia set up a medical corner in the lobby, using the old front desk as a triage station. Whitney photographed the rooms being opened, the unsafe areas being taped, the gas valves, the chain doors, the notices. Moss radioed the stranded vehicles and told them to send people in groups when escorted. Orrin marked unsafe sections with orange tape and a thick black marker that squeaked like a warning. Calder went into the kitchen. It was larger than he expected. Stainless counters dulled with disuse, a commercial stove, 2 deep sinks, a walk-in cooler that no longer cooled anything, and a wall of pans hanging like shields in an old armory. Dust covered the prep table. The floor needed mopping. One burner smelled faintly wrong before he even touched the valve. Nadine entered behind him and stopped dead. For the first time since he had met her, she did not speak. Her broad hand rested on the doorframe. Her eyes moved over the stove, the pans, the prep table, the old service window that opened toward the lobby. You know this kitchen? Calder asked. Nadine swallowed. Worked here 2 winters after my husband died, before the church took pity on my biscuits and gave them a purpose. Then she shook herself like a general remembering the war had not paused for nostalgia. That burner sticks. Left oven runs hot. The big soup pot should be under the south counter, unless thieves have terrible priorities. Calder opened the cabinet. There it was. Nadine's face lit with satisfaction. Good. Civilization may yet survive. Calder checked the lines while she cleaned with ruthless speed. He found 1 cracked hose and shut that section down. The rest could run if watched. He cleared the vent, reset a breaker, and got the hood fan coughing to life. It rattled like a dying tractor, then steadied. Nadine put both hands on her hips. Well? Calder wiped grease on a rag. Kitchen can work if nobody gets creative. I am an artist. You are a hazard. I have been called worse by better-fed men. By dusk, people began coming in from the highway. A truck driver with a red face and trembling fingers. A woman in her 60s clutching insulin in a lunch cooler. A man with an oxygen tank furious at needing help. 2 motel-bound salesmen who kept saying they had chains in the trunk as if chains were a religious identity. A couple from Idaho who had followed their GPS into a white kingdom of poor choices. They entered with snow on their shoulders and fear hidden behind complaints. Eloise met each one at the lobby table. Name, medication needs, emergency contact, vehicle location, any animals, any allergies. Spell your last name. "I'm just here to get warm," one man said. "And yet you have a name," Eloise replied without looking up. "Spell it." Marjorie, moving carefully with her cane, took people to the south rooms Orrin had cleared. Haven walked beside her, slow but steady, wearing the fresh bandage Delia had wrapped before they left the chapel. The dog did not perform comfort. She simply offered it. She stood near the man with the oxygen tank until his breathing settled. She rested her head on the knee of the shaking truck driver, who looked down as if he had been forgiven by a creature he had never met. The motel changed by degrees. First there was light, then heat in 3 rooms, then soup. Nadine's first pot was made from church ham, beans, carrots, onions, and whatever miracle she claimed could be found in the bottom of a donated box if one threatened it properly. The smell moved through the lobby and did more than warm people. It gave them instructions. Sit. Hold a bowl. Breathe. You are not yet lost. Calder stood near the kitchen doorway, hands blackened with old grease, listening to the building come alive. The lobby hummed. Eloise's pencil scratched. Delia's calm voice measured symptoms. Graham prayed with a man who pretended not to need it. Moss shook snow from his hat and muttered into the radio. Randall stood near the office door, watching strangers occupy his property with blankets, soup, wet boots, and inconvenient humanity. His motel, which had been worth more to him empty, was becoming useful while full. That was when Calder realized the night had turned. Not because the danger had passed. It had not. The storm still slammed the windows. The highway remained closed. The north roof groaned once in a gust, and Orrin stalked toward it, muttering threats at architecture. But fear had changed shape. It had entered as scattered people, each guarding a private panic. Now it moved around the lobby in shared tasks. Hold this. Write that. Check room 6. More cups. Who needs dry socks? Is anyone missing from the blue sedan? Calder had spent years believing usefulness meant fixing the thing that broke. Tonight, usefulness looked like an old cook cursing at a stove until 20 strangers ate. It looked like a retired postal worker writing names so no one vanished between rooms. It looked like Marjorie Finn, who had been locked out of her own rented life, knocking gently on motel doors and saying, "You're safe enough for now. That's a good beginning." Near 9, Randall approached Calder in the kitchen hallway. "You understand," Randall said quietly, "that none of this changes the closure." Calder was replacing a loose screw on the fire extinguisher bracket. He did not look up. "Doesn't change the weather either. You people are making a legal and emotional mess." Calder tightened the screw. "People usually are. This property was supposed to be empty." That made Calder stop. Through the service window, he could see Marjorie lowering herself beside a woman wrapped in 2 blankets. Haven lay at their feet, eyes half closed. Eloise was spelling a name back to a man who looked startled to hear it said correctly. Nadine was handing Graham a ladle and warning him not to baptize the soup. Calder turned to Randall. "It was never empty," he said. Randall's face held still, but the words struck something. Not conscience, perhaps. Not yet. But the first hairline fracture in the story, he had told himself. A horn sounded outside. Moss pushed through the lobby door with 2 volunteers behind him. "Got another vehicle at the curve. 1 passenger can't walk well. Need a chair or sled?" Before Calder could move, Nadine pointed her ladle toward a folded wheelchair near the hallway. "Laundry room," she said. "Old manager kept it there after Mr. Granger broke his ankle in 19. Check the left wheel. It sticks." Everyone stared at her. "What?" she snapped. "Some of us remember things besides being evicted." Calder ran to get it. The chair was there, So was a box of old thermal blankets no one had logged. So was a flashlight with corroded batteries, 3 good extension cords, and a stack of motel towels still sealed in plastic. Nadine's memory became a map. Eloise's lists became a net. Marjorie's presence became permission for frightened people to stop pretending they were fine. That was the real opening of Sagebrush Mile, not the keys Randall surrendered. The people he had dismissed began unlocking the place from the inside. By midnight, the storm still held the highway, but no one in the cleared wing was alone with it. The oxygen tank had a place near an outlet Calder trusted. The diabetic woman had eaten and checked her numbers under Delia's eye. The truck driver had stopped shaking. The Idaho couple had been assigned room 8, and a lesson from Eloise on why GPS was not a moral authority. Haven slept near the lobby heater, with her head on Marjorie's boot. Calder stood in the kitchen, washing bowls because Nadine had declared him less dangerous with soap than with seasoning. His hands smelled of grease, broth, and dishwater. His canvas jacket hung on the back of a chair, drying near the stove. Someone had put a mug of coffee beside him. Someone else had added cream without asking. It was wrong. He drank it anyway. Marjorie came to the service window. "You should sit," she said. "I've been told." "And yet?" "I remain disappointing." She smiled, tired but warm. Behind her the lobby glowed with mismatched lamps, emergency lanterns, and the low golden light from the kitchen. Snow battered the windows, but inside people had begun to speak in ordinary voices. That ordinary sound struck Calder harder than any cry for help. He had expected the motel to feel like a problem. Instead, for one dangerous, inconvenient night, it felt like a hearth. Not clean, not finished, not safe in the way forms preferred. But alive. Calder looked out at the lobby, at the women who had been pushed outside, now making room for others to come in. At Haven, sleeping beneath their voices. At a building he had known only as evidence becoming against all policy and profit, shelter. For the first time in years, he was not the man at the edge of the room planning his exit. He was simply one more pair of hands in the kitchen. And when dawn finally came, he did not want to be gone before anyone noticed how he took his coffee. Morning did not arrive at Sagebrush Mile Motel so much as uncover what the night had done. The storm had passed east before dawn, leaving the highway buried in ridges of wind-carved snow. The sky over Red Basin opened pale and bright, almost innocent, and the red hills beyond the motel glowed under their white caps like banked coals beneath ash. Sunlight struck the turquoise sign and made the peeling letters shine with a cheerfulness the building had not earned yet. Inside, the lobby smelled of coffee, damp wool, old carpet, soup, and human survival. People woke in chairs, on cots, under donated quilts. A truck driver snored beneath 3 blankets and 1 motel towel. The woman with insulin had her cooler tucked safely near Delia Shore's makeshift medical station. The man with the oxygen tank sat by the lobby window watching county plows push toward the highway with the offended dignity of someone who hated needing help but had decided to continue breathing anyway. No one had died. That seemed too small a sentence for what it meant. Calder Brennan stood near the service window of the kitchen, holding a mug of coffee someone had ruined with cream again. He drank it without complaint. His combat shirt was rolled at the forearms, the faded camouflage sleeves marked with grease from the furnace access panel. His canvas jacket hung near the stove, smelling of broth and machine oil. Nadine Crowell was already awake and already angry at breakfast. "Powdered eggs," she announced to the room, lifting a box as if presenting evidence of a minor war crime. This is what happens when civilization stops listening to grandmothers. Graham Lyle, pale from a night of too little sleep, accepted a plate from her. "I am grateful." "You're a pastor. You're paid to say things like that." "Not nearly enough." Nadine snorted, but gave him an extra slice of toast. At the lobby table, Eloise Varden had claimed the old guest register and turned it into a command ledger. Her glasses sat low on her nose. Her pencil moved steadily. Names, room numbers, vehicle locations, medication needs, who had been transported, who needed a ride, who needed a mechanic, who owed the kitchen a thank-you note whether they liked it or not. Deputy Harlan Moss came in from outside with snow clinging to his hat brim and a notebook in his hand. "Highway crew says East Lane opens in 2 hours if the wind behaves," he said. Eloise did not look up. "Wind has never been a reliable witness." "I'll put that in my report." "You should. It may improve it." Moss's mustache twitched. Delia was writing her own report at the front desk, calm and exact, listing symptoms, interventions, medication issues, temperature concerns, and the fact that multiple vulnerable adults had required emergency shelter after being displaced from the same property. She wrote without drama. That made it worse for anyone who hoped to dismiss the night as confusion. Orrin Vale stood in the hallway with his orange marker, his small level, and the expression of a man offended by lazy construction. He had already taped off the north wing, marked a water-damaged ceiling near the office, and declared the south wing usable with adult supervision and no optimism. Whitney Ames loved that phrase so much she wrote it down. Randall Cormack did not love anything that morning. He stood near the office door in the same charcoal overcoat, though the hem was now stained with slush and one polished boot bore a scrape from the loading dock. He looked at the lobby as though strangers had not merely slept in his building, but changed the language it spoke. That was the trouble. The motel no longer looked empty. It looked witnessed. Whitney spread the documents across the front desk in neat piles. Residency evidence, medical records, property access, emergency shelter use, animal ownership, structural assessment, witness statements. "Deputy Moss," she said, "I'll need your incident notes attached to the packet." Moss nodded. "You'll have them." "Delia, your medical summary?" "Before noon." "Orrin?" He slapped a clipboard onto the desk. "Temporary assessment, north wing unsafe, lobby, kitchen, laundry, and south rooms conditionally usable. Whole property closure was excessive unless somebody can show me a second building hiding inside the first one." Randall's jaw tightened. "I closed the property out of caution." Orrin turned slowly. "Caution wears boots. Fear wears perfume. Don't confuse them." Nadine whispered loudly, "I like him." Randall ignored her, though less successfully than usual. Whitney picked up a stack of envelopes from Eloise's folder. "Marjorie Finn received mail here for years. Eloise Varden as well. Nadine Crowell, too. They paid monthly, received medication deliveries, propane shares, home care visits. There are witnesses. There are records. There is a dog registered to this address." "Haven," Marjorie said. She sat near the lobby heater, a blanket over her knees, one hand resting on Haven's head. The old German shepherd lay half asleep at her feet, yellow and black coat, warm in the low light, bent ear twitching each time Randall's voice entered the room. Whitney nodded. "Haven." Randall folded his gloved hands in front of him. "My attorney will respond to any formal claim. I will not debate property law in front of an audience." "This building was an audience last night," Delia said without looking up from her report. "It saw plenty." The sentence silenced the room for a moment, not because it was clever, because it was true. Sagebrush Mile had held people through the storm. Its walls had listened to coughing, prayers, arguments, Nadine's insults, Eloise's spelling corrections, Haven's soft footsteps down the hall, Calder's tools in the furnace room. A building did not need to speak to testify. By mid-morning, the stranded travelers began leaving in careful waves. Before they went, several gave statements to Moss or Whitney. Most were brief, some embarrassed. A man who had mocked Eloise's sign-in sheet admitted he had forgotten his wife's medication in the car and Eloise had remembered to send someone back for it. The truck driver said the dog had kept him from shaking apart, then looked ashamed of the tenderness and left quickly. The woman with insulin wrote her name in Eloise's ledger with both hands, as if signing herself back into the day. Every statement made Randall smaller without anyone raising a voice. That, Calder thought, was the punishment Randall had not expected. Not disgrace. Usefulness. The people he had tried to remove had become necessary in front of witnesses. Calder was checking a loose outlet near the vending machine when Randall approached him. "You seem satisfied," Randall said. Calder tightened the final screw and put the cover plate back. "Outlet's grounded. That's satisfying." "I meant with yourself." "I try not to spend much time on that." Randall looked toward the lobby, where Graham was helping a volunteer stack folded blankets. "You think this makes you righteous?" Calder stood and wiped his hands on a rag. "No." "No? No?" That appeared to irritate Randall more than an accusation would have. The lobby had grown too busy for whatever Randall wanted to say. He nodded toward the office hallway. "A word." Calder considered refusing. Then he saw Whitney watching from the desk, one eyebrow lifted in a question. He gave her a small nod. Not permission. Information. He followed Randall into the office. The room was cold, though less than yesterday. Morning light came through dusty blinds, laying stripes across the desk, the old reservation board, the key hooks, and the framed black and white photo of Sagebrush Mile from the 1970s. In the picture, the motel looked new and hopeful. A car with fins sat in front. A woman in cat-eye glasses smiled beside the office door. Randall noticed Calder looking. "Original owner's wife," he said. "People tell me she made pies for truckers." People remember pie. They remember anything when it is useful in an argument. Calder leaned against the file cabinet. "You wanted a word." Randall removed his gloves, finger by finger, and laid them on the desk. Without them, his hands looked older. The skin over the knuckles was dry, the nails carefully trimmed. "You have no idea what it means to come from nothing," Randall said. Calder did not answer at once. Outside the office, Nadine's voice rose through the door. "No, Pastor, that is not how one stacks bowls unless one wishes to meet God suddenly." Randall's mouth tightened. "This town thinks I enjoy this, that I was born in a clean coat with a pen in my pocket." "Were you?" Randall looked at him sharply. Then, for the first time, the Polish slipped enough to show the metal underneath. "My father lost our place when I was 11. Trailer outside Casper. Lot rent went up. Work dried up. My mother packed dishes in newspaper while the landlord stood outside smoking and watching the time." His voice stayed controlled, but something old moved under it. "I learned early that if you do not own the paper, you do not own the floor under your feet." Calder said nothing. Randall looked out through the blinds at the motel lot. "I bought this property because it was undervalued, because everyone else saw rot and old women and broken heat. I saw a way up." "Away from what?" Randall's eyes flicked back. Calder held his gaze. The question hung between them, plain and dangerous. Randall's answer came colder. "Away from being the person someone can move." Calder understood then. Not forgiveness. Understanding was not pardon. Randall had been a boy standing beside packed dishes, promising himself never again. He had sharpened that promise into a key, then used it on other people's doors. "I know what it is," Calder said, "not to trust a place." Randall gave a short, bitter laugh. You have land, a cabin, a truck. Men like you always have somewhere to go." "That is not the same as having somewhere to belong." Randall paused. Calder looked through the dusty glass toward the lobby, where Marjorie was speaking softly to Haven. I spent half my life sleeping where someone else told me to sleep. Foster homes, barracks, forward camps, motels with bad locks. I got good at leaving before any room could prove it didn't want me." Randall said nothing. "The difference," Calder continued, "is I was afraid a house would reject me. You were afraid poverty would catch you, so you decided other people were safer if they stayed temporary." Randall's face hardened. "That is a sermon disguised as psychology." "No, it's a repair note." "A what?" "You used the wrong fix. Something broke in you, and you patched it by owning more than you could care for." Randall stared at him. For a moment, Calder thought the man might laugh or shout or order him out. Instead, Randall looked toward the old keyboard on the wall. Room 12's hook was empty. "Those rooms are mine," Randall said, but the sentence no longer sounded as large as he wanted. Calder pushed away from the cabinet. "Then you should have known they weren't empty." He left Randall in the office. By afternoon, the shape of consequence became clearer. Whitney held a meeting at the lobby desk with Graham, Moss, Delia, Orrin, 2 members of the town council on speakerphone, and a representative from a local winter relief fund named Paula Greer, whose voice crackled through the phone with brisk authority and no patience for moral fog. The proposal did not arrive like a miracle. It arrived like paperwork with boots on. Sagebrush Mile would be leased for 18 months as an emergency winter lodging program. The church would coordinate volunteers and meals. The Winter Relief Fund would cover initial rent, repairs, and insurance adjustments. The town would provide inspection support and fuel assistance. Whitney would file protective claims preserving the women's residency rights and property access. Orrin would oversee phased safety repairs. Randall would retain ownership for now, but accept a temporary use agreement with a right of purchase if the program met compliance standards. Randall objected to nearly every sentence. Whitney expected that. Moss expected that. Even Graham, who looked pained by conflict, had brought 2 pens. The real pressure came not from a threat, but from accumulation. Delia's report, Orrin's assessment, witness statements, photos, the chip record, medication disruption, weather conditions, possible civil penalties, possible litigation. The fact that the entire town now knew the building had been usable enough to save people after being called too unsafe to shelter the women who had lived there. Randall did the math. He signed near 4 o'clock, not with grace, not with regret, with the tight hand of a man choosing the least expensive exit from a room full of consequences. No one clapped. Nadine made a soup sound from the kitchen that might have been approval or indigestion. After the signing, Marjorie asked to see room 12. Calder went with her. So did Haven. The hallway to the south wing smelled of dust and warming pipes. Orrin had checked the ceiling, the outlets, the heater. The room was safe enough to enter, though not yet to sleep in. The chain had been removed from the door. The lock still stuck. Calder worked it open with a little graphite and patience. Room 12 was small, a bed with a faded spread, a chair near the heater, a narrow dresser, a lamp, a curtain with tiny yellow flowers. Nothing grand, nothing that would impress anyone who measured life in square footage and resale value. But Haven stepped inside as if entering a chapel. She went first to the heater vent, sniffed it, then the corner near the bed where her bowl had once sat. She touched the scuffed place in the floor with her nose. Her tail moved once. Not joy exactly, recognition. Marjorie stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame. Her face did not collapse. That would have been easier to witness. Instead, it held itself together with librarian discipline and old sorrow. "My books were on that dresser," she said. 3 from the county library. One was overdue before all this. Calder looked at the empty dresser. "I had tea bags in the top drawer, Haven's brush in the second. I kept meaning to replace that curtain." Haven came back to her and pressed her head against Marjorie's hip. Marjorie's hand lowered into the dog's fur. "I tried to come back," she whispered. "I did, Haven." The dog leaned harder into her. Calder looked around the room again. He saw what Randall had not seen. Not furniture, not vacancy. Evidence of a life interrupted mid-breath. A dent in the chair arm where Marjorie's hand had rested each time she stood. 2 small nail holes where a calendar had hung. A pale square on the wall where a picture had protected the paint from sun. The scratches near the inside of the door, lower than his knee. Haven's work, waiting to be let in. Calder felt something in him go quiet. A room did not become empty because someone removed the person. Sometimes absence made the room louder. Marjorie finally stepped inside. Only 2 steps. Enough. She touched the dresser, then the curtain, then the doorframe. Calder did not hurry her. When she turned back, her eyes were wet but steady. "Not tonight," she said. He understood. Not yet. Not like this. He closed the door gently after she and Haven stepped out. This time, the lock did not feel like an ending. It felt like a pause. In the lobby, the papers had been signed, the witnesses were tired, and the stormlight had softened toward evening. Randall Cormack stood by the office window, looking at the south wing as if it had become a language he could read only poorly. Calder did not feel victory. Victory was too loud a word for old women returning to a room that should never have been taken. But as Haven settled at Marjorie's feet, and Eloise wrote, "Room 12, property review pending," in her ledger, Calder felt something sturdier than triumph. A door had opened, not all the way, but enough for Winter to lose one more argument. Winter did not release Red Basin all at once. It loosened its grip by inches. First, the snow on the south-facing ridges thinned enough for the red stone to show through like old fire beneath torn linen. Then the highway stayed open 3 days in a row, which Nadine Crowell declared not spring, just winter getting lazy. The mornings still cut sharp. The pipes still complained. The north wing of Sagebrush Mile Motel still stood closed behind orange tape and Orrin Vale's large black warning letters. But the place no longer looked abandoned. That was the first miracle, if Calder Brennan was willing to use a word that large. He usually was not. The motel woke in pieces, not beautifully, not quickly. It woke like an old man with bad knees and a stubborn reason to get out of bed. Calder started with heat. He replaced 2 cracked lines, cleaned the furnace filters, rewired a thermostat in room 6, and taught Graham Lyle how to listen for a pilot light that was lying. Orrin inspected each repair with the suspicious affection of a man who trusted good work but not the universe. Whitney Ames fought the insurance language until it stopped pretending to be scripture. Delia Shore turned the old office into a health check corner with a blood pressure cuff, a locked medication box, a kettle, and a sign Nadine hated because it said, "Please ask for help before it becomes an emergency." "That sign has no poetry," Nadine complained. "It has accuracy," Delia said. "So does a death certificate. Doesn't mean I want it on the wall." Eloise Varden made the wall beside the front desk her kingdom. She pinned up a winter contact map of Red Basin and the roads beyond it, each name written in her neat hand. People who lived alone, people who needed medication deliveries, people with propane tanks that ran low before storms, people who hated phones but would answer if Nadine threatened to bring soup and opinions. A box beneath the map held index cards sorted by road, room, and emergency need. Calder watched her one afternoon as she moved a card from unknown to confirmed. "You enjoy this," he said. Eloise adjusted her glasses. "I enjoy accuracy. Joy is a separate department." "You ever visit that department?" "Occasionally. They keep poor records." Nadine ruled the kitchen as if appointed by heaven and confirmed by superior biscuits. The first week of the emergency lease, she found 3 usable stockpots, 2 pans worth saving, and one ladle she held up like a recovered relic. "There are objects," she announced, "that wait for the right hand." Calder looked at the ladle. "That thing has dents." "So do you. Yet here we are." He could not argue with kitchen theology. Marjorie Finn settled slowly into room 12 again, though not as if nothing had happened. Some mornings she stood in the doorway before entering, one hand on the frame, as if asking permission from her own life. Haven always went first. The old German shepherd would sniff the heater vent, circle the rug twice, then lie down near Marjorie's chair with her chin on her paws and her bent ear toward the hall. No one called Haven unclaimed again, not once. Her name was written on a small card near the front desk. Haven, Marjorie Finn. Room 12. Friendly, protective, do not feed sausage without Nadine's permission. Nadine had added the last part. It was wise. The new name came 2 weeks after the lease was signed. They had gathered in the lobby after supper, not for ceremony, though Graham had brought a folder and therefore threatened one. The turquoise sign outside still read Sagebrush Mile, peeling and crooked, but people had begun avoiding the old name without discussing it. Names, Eloise said, mattered. The wrong one could misplace a person. The right one could hold a door open. Whitney suggested Red Basin Winter Lodge. Orrin said that sounded like a county grant trying to wear boots. Graham suggested St. Anselm House. Nadine asked whether he intended to make people feel guilty before or after soup. Marjorie did not speak at first. She sat near the lobby heater with Haven at her feet, the wine-red scarf folded in her lap. When the suggestions quieted, she looked down at the dog. She found a place where people had been told they did not belong, Marjorie said. Maybe the name should remember that. Haven lifted her head at the sound of Marjorie's voice. No one voted. Not exactly. Eloise wrote the words on a clean sheet of paper and pinned them beneath the old sign-in clipboard. Haven House Lodge. Nadine stared at it, then sniffed. Acceptable? Which, from her, was nearly a trumpet blast. The name did not turn the building holy. It did not fix the roof or pay the propane bill, but it changed how people entered. A trucker stranded for one night said the name aloud before stepping through the door. A widow from Pike Bend called to ask if Haven House was that place where someone writes you down before a storm. The Winter Relief Fund printed the name on a temporary letterhead, and Eloise approved the font after several moral reservations. Calder tried to stay temporary through all of it. He failed gradually. At first, he only came by in the mornings to check the furnace and return to his cabin before supper. Then Nadine needed someone to tighten the shelf above the stove. Then the laundry room drain backed up. Then room 8's window latch broke. Then Orrin asked him to walk the south roof line. Then Graham needed help installing a better light over the side entrance. Then Delia began leaving coffee for him in the kitchen, black at first, then with 1 drop of cream because she claimed growth should be uncomfortable but not fatal. By late February, Calder had a key ring. It was not official at first. Graham simply handed it to him one morning and said, "You are here earlier than I am." Calder looked at the keys. "That's not a job title." "No, but it is a symptom." Whitney made it official a week later. Part-time winter maintenance coordinator. Calder disliked every word except winter. "Coordinator sounds like I should own a clipboard." Eloise looked up. "I can lend you one." "No." "You would improve with documentation." "Most men would," Delia said, passing through with her medical bag. So Calder accepted the keys, the small room behind the kitchen that had once stored broken chairs, and the right to grumble about the furnace as if it had betrayed him personally. He did not own the lodge. His name was not on the sign. No one called him its savior, mostly because Nadine threatened to throw a potato at anyone who did. He was simply there. That frightened him more than the storm had. Storms ended. Need did not. Need learned your schedule. It found out how you took coffee. It asked whether you had eaten. It placed your name on a volunteer sheet without consulting your fear. It remembered when you came in late and said, "There you are," as if absence had become noticeable. One evening, Calder stood in the kitchen doorway and nearly turned around. Nothing terrible had happened. That was the trouble. Nadine was arguing with Graham about whether cornbread needed sugar. Eloise was reading phone numbers from her winter map to a volunteer. Delia was laughing quietly at something Marjorie said. Haven was asleep under the side table, one paw twitching in a dream. Someone had hung Calder's canvas jacket on the second hook by the stove instead of the last hook near the exit. The second hook, not the leaving hook, the staying hook. Calder stared at it too long. Marjorie noticed from across the room. She did not call him out. She only patted the chair beside her once, then went back to brushing Haven's coat. A small invitation, no rope, no demand. That was the thing about Haven House that undid him. It did not trap him. It simply kept making room. The cross arrived on a bright afternoon when the snow had softened along the parking lot edges and dripped from the old turquoise sign in steady silver lines. Barton Keene brought it in wrapped in brown paper. He was 73, lean and stooped, with hands knotted from a lifetime of saws and planes, and a white beard that made him look kinder than his language allowed. He had been one of the travelers stranded on the night the motel opened. Calder remembered him as the man who had refused a blanket until Nadine called him a dried fence post with pride issues. Barton had returned twice since then to fix a wobbly chair and complain about the price of nails. This time he found Calder in the kitchen repairing a loose hinge on the pantry door. "Made something," Barton said. Calder looked at the package. "For the door?" "For you. Try not to look wounded." "I don't like gifts." "I don't like your hinge work. We all suffer." He handed Calder the parcel. Inside was a small wooden cross, no longer than Calder's hand. It was simple, sanded smooth, but not polished too clean. One piece of wood was darker, stained with age and faint coffee rings. The other was paler, scarred along one edge. Barton tapped the darker piece. "Counterwood from Juniper Bell. I salvaged some years back when the roof started going. This piece here is from the broken frame of room 12. Orrin said it was scrap. Orrin says many things because his soul was inspected and found structurally sound, but dull." Calder held the cross without speaking. The Juniper Bell Diner, room 12. The place where Haven had waited. The place Marjorie had tried to return. Two pieces of damaged wood joined into one shape. Barton cleared his throat. "Thought the kitchen could use it. Folks come in cold. Might do them good to see something that says nobody gets left outside if we can help it." Calder's grip tightened. "I'm not much of a church man," he said. From behind him, Graham Lyle answered, "Most people aren't when they are holding something holy." Calder turned. The pastor stood near the service window with two empty soup bowls in his hands, eyes gentle behind his glasses. Graham nodded toward the cross. Not every cross is hung to prove a man is righteous. Some are hung to remind him not to abandon people in the cold. Nadine, chopping carrots nearby, did not look up. "Also, that wall is ugly." The moment survived because of her. Calder set the cross on the counter and did not hang it that day. No one pushed him. That evening, snow began again. Not storm snow, soft snow. The kind that fell straight down beyond the kitchen windows and caught the light from inside, turning each flake gold for half a breath before it vanished into the dark. Haven House Lodge was full, but not crowded. Two older men from East Ridge had come in early because Eloise called before the roads drifted. A woman from outside town had stopped for coffee and stayed when her sedan refused to start. Delia had checked on a man with a cough and declared it not dramatic yet. Graham had built up the lobby fire. Nadine had made soup and insulted the carrots. You cut them like fence posts, she told Calder. They're vegetables. They'll forgive me. Vegetables have standards? Eloise stood by the front desk reading from her storm list. Pike Bend Widow confirmed. West Cattle Road Brothers confirmed. Propane delivery delayed to the Haskins place. Follow up tomorrow. Mr. Arlen still claims he does not need anyone calling. Call him twice, Nadine said. I already did. Good woman. Marjorie sat near the stove with Haven at her feet. The dog's coat had begun to shine again, black saddle and honey gold sides warm in the lamplight. Her left ear still bent at the tip. Her paw still stiffened in cold weather, but her eyes no longer searched every doorway with panic. They rested now. Calder stood by the kitchen wall with Barton's cross in one hand and a small hammer in the other. Delia saw him first. She came to stand beside him, quiet enough that he did not feel cornered. "Need help measuring?" she asked. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded metal ruler he had carried for years. "Got it." "I figured." He marked the spot near the key hooks and the furnace checklist. Not over the dining area, not above the front desk, not where it would become decoration for strangers to admire. The kitchen wall, where hands worked, where coffee burned, where soup began, where people entered through the side door with snow on their boots and needs they tried to hide. He drove the nail in. The sound was small. Everyone heard it anyway. Conversation softened but did not stop. That was right. The place did not become a chapel. It remained a kitchen, a living room. A shelter with bad pipes and good soup. Calder hung the cross, stepped back, and adjusted it once. Delia looked at it. "For luck?" she asked. Calder looked around before answering. At Nadine, muttering over carrots as if negotiating with hostile diplomats. At Eloise, holding her list like a book of names the winter was not allowed to steal. At Graham, stacking bowls carefully under Nadine's suspicious eye. At Marjorie, one hand resting in Haven's fur, the wine-red scarf around her shoulders. At Haven, breathing slow and even beneath the table, no longer guarding a lost door, but resting beside one that opened. At the hooks near the stove, where his canvas jacket hung in the second place from the end. He thought of his cabin still standing against the ridge, safe, locked, waiting. He thought of all the rooms he had left before anyone noticed the shape of his absence. Then he looked at the cross made from a broken diner and a repaired motel. "No," Calder said. "Not for luck." Delia waited. "To remember the way back." No one made a speech. Nadine did not allow speeches near soup. But Marjorie looked up, and her eyes shone with a softness that did not ask him to explain. Haven opened one eye, thumped her tail once against the floor, and closed it again, as if the matter had been settled. Calder picked up the pot of coffee from the warmer and carried it to the table. "Who needs more?" he asked. Eloise raised her cup without looking away from her list. Graham lifted his. Barton said, "If it's your coffee, I need less." Nadine said, "Pour mine anyway." "I like to know my enemies." Calder filled the cups. Outside, snow fell bright and steady over Red Basin, covering the old tire tracks, softening the scarred lot, whitening the sign that would soon be repainted. The north wing still needed a roof. The furnace would fail again if neglected. Randall's paperwork was not finished. Winter had not surrendered. Life rarely did. But inside Haven House Lodge, bowls passed from hand to hand. Names stayed written. Keys hung where people could find them. A dog slept without fear at an old woman's feet. And Calder Brennan, who had once believed home was only a door that locked, stood in a noisy kitchen with soup steam on his face, a cross on the wall, and people who knew how he took his coffee. For the first time, he did not feel the need to correct them. For the first time, when someone called from the lobby, "Calder, are you home?" he answered without thinking. "Yeah," he said. Then he stopped. The word had left him before he could test it. Home. It did not feel like a lie. It felt like a light left on. Sometimes healing does not arrive as a grand miracle. Sometimes it comes as a warm bowl of soup, a name written on a list, a door opened before the storm gets worse, or a faithful dog reminding us that no one should be treated like they are forgotten. Calder thought home was only a place with a lock, but Haven, Marjorie, and the people of Red Basin showed him that home is where someone notices when you are missing, saves you a seat, and keeps the light on long enough for you to find your way back. Maybe there is someone in your life who needs that kind of light today. A call, a visit, a small act of kindness, a reminder that they still matter. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us who has been a safe place for you in a cold season. And if you want more stories of loyalty, healing, and hope, please subscribe to the channel. May God give you peace in the rooms of your life that still feel unfinished, and may He guide you towards someone who needs a door opened with kindness.